Hello everyone and welcome to our notes on triangle congruence. Our warm-up question today from class is if you were on a road trip right now and you stopped at a gas station, what would be your go-to drink and snack combo? So for me, my go-to is just Cheez-Its and a Dr. Pepper. Like, it's a classic. So if you're in class, share that with the person next to you. If you're online, comment your answer below. So what are we doing today in our lesson? Well, we've been talking about triangles, and we've been talking about how to prove triangles congruent, you have to have 3 angles of one triangle congruent to 3 angles of another triangle, and 3 sides of one triangle congruent to 3 sides of another triangle. So you're checking 6 total pieces of information, which is a lot. Like, I'm just being honest, that's a lot. Today, we're going to start looking at, there are some shortcuts that we kind of previewed to and talked about a few weeks ago about how to make this a little bit faster. So before we do that, we're going to talk about what it means to be included for a side or for an angle. And unfortunately in life, all of us know how it feels to be included, and we also know how it feels to be non-included or excluded from a group. And so let's look at what happens with that in geometry. What is an included angle in geometry? An included angle is going to be when the angle is directly between or touching 2 indicated sides. So in this triangle, obviously I have 3 sides, but if I have 2 sides that are indicated, meaning like highlighted or marked, if I have these congruence marks, these are the indicated ones with the marks, kind of like tattoos, the included angle would have to be touching both of those or in between. So it kind of creates this sandwich. That purple angle is touching both that the blue side with 1 tick mark and then also the longer side with 2 tick marks. So it's happening in between. So I'm going to abbreviate that included to INC. This is included between those 2 sides. So while an angle can be included between 2 sides, we can also have a side that is included between angles. So a side is going to be included when it's directly between or touching 2 indicated angles. So while I know that I do have 3 angles in this triangle, I'm only going to put congruence marks on 2 of them. Those are the 2 indicated ones. They kind of look like some arc symbols. And so the side that would be included between these 2 angles is the one that is touching both angles. So this side would be included because it is between those 2 angles. So it kind of makes a sandwich, an ASA sandwich. And then this one makes an SAS sandwich. Side and then angle, then a side, an angle and then a side, and then an angle. And so that's going to be important because really before we even get into looking at 2 triangles and comparing them, we have to look at studying 1 triangle and naming the information that is relevant or that is indicated. And so it says directions identify what info is given. So that's going to be important. This is an important skill, so that's why it's going to be 2 parts. We're breaking this lesson into 2 days. Then, whether your angle or side is included or non-included. So I'm going to zoom in on this very first triangle, and it has an S, which of course just stands for sides, and then the A is going to stand for angles. So I know that in this triangle that I have 3 sides and 3 angles, but only 3 things are indicated. In class, I talk a lot about how that's like tattoos. So on this picture, I have a side length. I have a side here with a mark, and then I have a side here with 2 marks, 2 tick marks. So I have a total of 2 sides marked, and then I have a total of 1 angle mark, just 1. And so here's what we're going to do to list this information. This is really, really good practice. You're going to circle the one that only has 1. And what we're trying to ask ourselves is that angle included or non-included? So is it happening between the 2 or is it non-included? Is it off to the side? Well, this angle is included. It's included. And so if it's included, you're going to list it in between the 2 sides. So I'm going to say SAS. It's in between the 2, so I'm going to show that by writing it like this and showing that that angle is happening in between these 2 sides. If it's non-included, we'll list it last. We'll list it off to the side, and we'll list it third. All right, so let's move on. Let's go to our next one. Now I have just a total of 1 side marked, but I do have 2 angles marked on this picture. I have 2 different angles marked. And so again, our process is going to be to circle the one with 1 and ask ourselves, is that lonely one included or non-included in the conversation? And so that side, unfortunately, is only touching one of these angles. It's touching this bottom left yellow angle. It's not touching the other one. So the way I think about this is it's kind of like these two yellow angles are having a conversation, and that blue side is just like the awkward third wheel. He's only standing next to one of them. So when I list this information, I'm not going to go ASA, or I'm sorry, SAAS. I'm going to go, instead of ASA, I'm going to go AAS. I'm going to show that these two yellow angles are next to each other, and that this side is kind of like the awkward third wheel. He's standing off to the side, so I'm going to list him third. All right. You'll get faster and faster and faster at this as we go, but we're going to keep highlighting. We're going to keep color coding. This is very good practice and will help you later for the rest of the unit. I have one side marked or indicated in this picture. Then I have two angles again. So very, very similar to the problem we just did. So I'm going to circle again. So this one was non-included. I'm going to circle this one and say, okay, is this included or non-included? Is this side touching both angles or just one? Well, in this picture, this one's going to be included in this triangle. And so when I list this, I'm going to list the S in the middle. It's happening in between those two angles. So you're either going to list the one that has one in the middle or last, depending on if it's included or non-included. And that just helps us match the shortcuts for one day. All right, let's keep going. All right, this next picture, we've got a triangle. I've got two sides indicated. Both of these have congruence marks, and they're different than each other. So I've got two sides and one angle. So we just have to ask ourselves, is that angle included or non-included? Is it touching both sides, or is it only touching one? Unfortunately, it's only touching one, so this is going to be a non-included angle. And so I'm going to write SSA. I'm going to list it third. I'm going to list it last. So that's the information that's indicated. It doesn't mean that there's not another side. It doesn't mean that there's not two other angles. Those angles just aren't marked. And so the more you do this, the better you get at it. But I love this one. This is my favorite one. I call this the Slytherin triangle. Because when I go to look at this one, I have three different sides indicated, but I have no angles. So they're all sides and zero angles. I get to go ahead and just list all three of those straight, SSS. All three of those sides are marked, and there's no angles marked at all. So that one's easy to see. SSS kind of makes me think of a snake going, and that's why I call it the Slytherin triangle. Easy to see. All right, let's keep going. Now I've got another side indicated. And then on this picture, I do have two angles. So again, here's my count. Two angles, one side. We just have to figure out, is that ASA or AAS? Do I need to list the side in the middle or last? Unfortunately, that side is only touching one of these angles. It's only touching this yellow angle right here, so that's going to be non-included. Since it's non-included, I'm going to go ahead again and list it last. List it third off to the side. So that angle, those two angles we're chatting, and the side is just hanging out last. It's non-included. All right. Again, we have something very similar on this one. We've got only one side, but I have two angles indicated. And so when I go to list that information, I need to figure out, is that side included or non-included? Well, this one makes a sandwich. You can see that this is an angle, a side, and then an angle. I always think about it. It looks like it's kind of like bread and then meat and then bread. Okay, it's happening right in the middle. And so since it's included, I'm going to list this one as ASA. That side length was included in the angles. So it's listed in the middle. Okay. All right. Let's look at this one. I've got two sides indicated, and then I've got an angle indicated. So here's my count, 1 and 2. So you go to the one with 1 and you say, is that included or non-included? It would need to be right here, smack dab in the middle if it was included. So it's off to the side. It's off to awkwardly only touching one of the sides. So when I list this information, I'm going to list the A third. The reason we don't list it first is because of whenever we want to match the shortcuts one day, it will help us if we list it third. Also, I wouldn't want to list the A first because then that would spell a bad word. ASS is not something that your teacher is going to want you to write on one of your papers. So we're going to list that as side, side, angle instead of angle, side, side. All right, let's keep going. Here we go. I have one angle and then two sides indicated. One angle and two sides. There's my count. This angle is included. And so because it's included, I'm going to write that as SAS. That A happens in the middle of those two sides. SAS. That's my sassy triangle. All right. Here we go again. Here's another angle. Very, very similar to our last problem, but I made it just a little bit different so that you see it is still, the ratio count is still 1 to 2, but that angle is not happening in between those two. So again, we list it third. Listed third. Okay, this is my second favorite one because it's easy to see. There are no sides indicated, so I need to switch to my yellow highlighter because all I have indicated in this triangle is 3 angles. So my count is 3 to 0, so I don't even have to think about the order because all 3 of them are angles. AAA, triple A. Okay, and then last but not least, we've got 2 angles to one side is the count. And so I'm going to ask if is that side included or not included. Sadly, it's only touching one. It's not happening in between, so I have to list it last, SSA. And so all of this was just practice on labeling information in a triangle that is given, that is already on there, that is already marked. The other thing I wanted to talk about in this video is besides angles and sides that are already pre-marked or already tattooed onto the triangle, there are going to be situations where you might be able to add stuff depending on if the triangles are touching or if you're given more information. So these following items are what you should pay attention to that can be marked or added or tattooed to the triangles when they are overlapping. Triangles might be overlapping at a common side. So you can see that between these 2 triangles that I just marked in pink, they are touching in the middle. They are touching at a side. So I'd be able to add a side mark there. That segment RF is going to be also present in the other triangle FR. And so both of those would be the same length if we broke those apart. If I snapped them apart, boom, they would both have a segment RF in them. That can also happen when they're overlapping, but they're on top of each other. This segment BC is in both the right triangle on the right and the right triangle on the left. So this right triangle as well as this right triangle. So it kind of looks like a crown or like the base of a crown. That base is in both of those triangles. Okay. We also can have a situation where it kind of like makes a bow tie. So these overlap at a point in the middle, point O, and around these points, I have vertical angles that are created. So those angles are congruent to each other. It is what I call the bow tie angles. Those are vertical. So I could add some arcs here to indicate that those are congruent. So while before I only had a side and a side congruent, now I have a side and an angle congruent to another side and an angle. And then whenever you see these little triangles right here, these are not on here for fun. They put these on here for a reason. This indicates that these lines must be parallel. Whenever those lines are parallel to each other, what this is going to create is alternate interior angles. And this year with my students, what we did is we said to find those angles that are alternate interior based on these purple lines. This triangle kind of indicates you are here, so start here and go to the transversal. So that angle would be congruent to start here and go to the transversal. Those 2 angles would be congruent to each other. The only thing we did was we turned these sideways just to make sure you really understood. What if these lines are the parallel ones? Well, what changes, I'm going to highlight my transversal in blue to mark my alternate interior angles. I start at the triangle. I am here, you are here, and I'm going to mark these angles congruent to these angles. So those angles would be congruent to each other. So that is something that you can add. We could also use the reflexive property on these and add the sides overlapping in the middle. The only other kind of angles you might be able to add are when the triangles are overlapping at an angle. And so if I ask you where these are overlapping, angle C would be a part of both this purple triangle, boom, on the left, and then as well as this blue triangle on the right. Angle C is an obtuse angle, and it is happening in both of those triangles, so I'd be able to add that information and add an angle. So you might be able to add angles or sides depending on if the triangles are touching or not. And then tomorrow in our next video, part 2, we will get to the shortcuts that you are able to use to prove triangles congruent. I hope you are having a fabulous